Hi, this is Paul. I've had some videos from Kidology, Zandil, um, that's her real name. Talked about real names on the Randos conversation that's currently in the membership section. It'll come to the full channel in a little while, I'm sure, probably when I'm in Europe. And I've done some videos with some of her stuff recently. And part of the reason I always do Randos conversations where I always go through people's stories is I find that I am more generous when the people have a story behind them instead of just being a name or a face or an avatar on the screen. And she, there are always little clues dropped about her backstory, but this actually gets into the backstory. And somebody left a comment on one of the videos that, oh, she was on Triggernometry and she talked about her story. And so I looked it up, and well worth seeing. So let's have a listen.
Having a unique
Let me get my settings right.
background, and you really do have a unique background. Tell everybody about that.
Well, let's start all the way from the beginning. I was abandoned by my mother alongside my older brother, and we were then separated into different fostering situations. I was fostered by a white South African family of women, sort of an intergenerational great-grandmother, grandmother, mother. The mother adopted me, but unfortunately, she had severe mental health issues, bipolar. And so I was raised by her mother, who was...
It's very common on the Randos interview for someone to have a painful and difficult story of childhood. And yeah, this qualifies as painful and difficult.
a Pentecostal and was devout. And this was post-apartheid South Africa, the late 1990s, early 2000s. And she was basically believed that the Lord spoke through her. And I was sort of an example of the potential of South Africa, or the potential of being a rainbow child of the rainbow nation, and the potential that Black South Africans could have if raised accordingly.
So no pressure then.
No, not really. No. So I was very devout, very religious, and as a result, my life was quite blissful until it wasn't, until, unfortunately, she...
Now, we're going to obviously listen to more, but this theme that you often hear from evangelicals or people who've left Christianity, the just how much they enjoyed it and loved it until they didn't.
Developed cancer, and we believed that God was going to heal her, obviously. Obviously, he didn't. And so, unfortunately, she passed away. And I then went to boarding school in South Africa.
How old were you when she passed away?
I was 13, going on 14. Wow. So, yes. And this was quite a long... she was sick from when I was about 9 years old until 13. So it was a very long and slow death, regrettably. But I was then in boarding school for the last year of her life. And then suddenly I was told that I'm moving to the UK to be fostered by her ex-husband, who was a 75-year-old white South African who'd lived in Zimbabwe when it was Rhodesia. And he was very mournful of the good old days before the blacks came into power. And so I moved here. I was given a day's notice, and I came to live with him. First thing I saw going into his flat was a poster saying "Kill the Blacks" from back from his.
It's great how both of them. It's like, oh.
Good old days before the blacks came into power. And so I moved here. I was given a day's notice, and I came to live with him. First thing I saw going into his flat was a poster saying "Kill the Blacks" from back from his day serving in the
Yeah. What a start in life.
Zimbabwean or Rhodesian Civil War. So yes, we didn't get on.
You are British. That is the most understated thing I've ever heard in my
He
life.
had a poster saying, "Kill people like me." We didn't get on. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I think I do commend my religious upbringing because it has made me very understanding. Even though I'm not a believer now, it's made me incredibly understanding of things that I think otherwise I wouldn't be so understanding of. So we were just from completely different worlds, and it was very awkward for him to live with me and also to sort of acknowledge that I was a part of his family. So it was quite contentious. I also did not want to be here at all. And yes, so I was here. I then went to school and I found a new religion, which was getting into Cambridge at any cost. And I only applied.
Well, when we go a little bit further, when she talks about these little micro religions, she really does have a handle on it. And yeah, I really appreciated her in this conversation.
To Cambridge, got into Cambridge, and I thought that was going to be the beginning of my full agency. It was actually the beginning of the end, and I suddenly was exposed to sort of a culture of critical theories which told me that I was a victim and that I was at an inherent disadvantage. And that really messed with my mind. I got very depressed, was on antidepressants, was suicidal for my second year. Yes, it wasn't going very well, but after I left Cambridge, I sort of didn't know what to do. I was meant to go to Oxford, that fell through. And so I ended up working in retail. And after working in retail, I have just been doing YouTube ever since. Yeah.
Well, Francis, may I just...
Go for it.
One thing I was going to ask you about victimhood is something I talk about a lot, as you know. I mean...
Now let's jump ahead to some more parts of the story. There's plenty of woke, anti-woke stuff. I mean, that's the shtick. Now they're sort of talking about what's wrong with the world.
In my opinion, since the 70s, especially since second wave feminism, early days of second wave feminism, this idea of the personal being political has taken over. And the personal, in my opinion, is never political. It's always philosophical at its root. And that's something that is very personal. And that's something...
Now pay attention to the way she uses the word philosophical, because that'll come into play in what I think is the most interesting part of the conversation.
Thing that you have to take responsibility for. When the personal becomes political, suddenly all responsibility is delegated to somebody else. It's somebody else's problem that you're oppressed. It's somebody else's problem that you can't advance, that you can't do with your life what you want to do. You can completely invert morality to serve you. And I think that's what has happened with a lot of identity political groups and movements now.
And do you think a lot of people of your generation buy into that idea, the fact that, you know, the personal is political and it's not their fault, they're not doing what they want because the patriarchy or whoever it is stopping them from doing so?
Yes, I've been cancelled so many times for saying just that, if I say anything like that, because there's no conception, especially with Gen Z, and I'd say millennials as well. But with Gen Z, there's absolutely no idea in how to fathom your identity beyond that of it being a political statement and being something that other people have to recognize and other people have to do something about. They have to change their actions in relation to how you identify. And you should be able to engage with the world and walk in the world safely, securely, and in the exact way that you envisage and see.
Now you can see where her story, and again, it isn't the case that everybody who has a hard story will sort of be cured from this sense of personal entitlement, but it just doesn't really work out that well.
And ultimately have no responsibility.
So the world, just to translate what you're saying into, so that I understand it better, simpler language, what you're saying is essentially people carry an idea of how the world is supposed to adjust to them.
Yes, yes. As opposed to...
But I understand how stupid that is at an intellectual level, but at a practical level, are you not going to be slapped in the face by reality on a daily basis if you attempt to do this?
Yes, you are. And that's why I think a lot of people retreat to the internet. And especially in my generation, because the internet allows you to live in the delusion that the world can change. And also it means that when you go into the world and it doesn't conform to what you want it to be, you get very depressed, mental health issues arise. Everything seems a lot worse than it actually is. And I definitely see that as a big problem with my generation.
Now, this going into the internet again reminds me of the Guy Sengstock speech that he gave at the beginning of the After Socrates episode 24.
Why this? Why that?
Well, I would say this is not exhaustive, but I think it is. I want to see if I can distinguish that we're in a time in history where something's happened with relationship and communication, primarily due to the internet, that has never happened before.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm thinking about what she says about going into the internet.
If we look at it like this, like before texting and emailing and answering machines, before all that, if you had to have exchange of information, you had to at least talk on the phone. You had to do it through relationship. Now there was,
in other words, your basic interchange with the world was mediated by relationship, and relationship is both ways, whereas absorption from screen is just one way. But it isn't just one way because we select what we absorb, and that selection bias then is sort of masked.
Television and radio, where there was one-way communication, receiving of it, but the exchange of information always involved relationality. And because of that, to function required, out of necessity, so much relationality just by virtue of functioning.
And so when she gets into her grandfather's place and looks at the posters and discovers that now this isn't just sort of one of these systemic racists, this is the real kind, and relationality isn't going to be so easy.
I think the first sign of this, where it was used like this, right, was relationship and communication got uncoupled with the answering machine. Was the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And then it went into email, and then texting, and then social media and TikTok, and the multiple array of things, such that we're actually at a time where it's starting to occur for, like, say, the Gen X tradition, like the Gen Xers, or not Xers, is it Z? Showing my age. Who don't have a memory before synchronistic communication, right, was optional, right? They don't even have a memory for that. Therefore, they don't even have it as, it's almost like relationship on some level occurs as this unnecessary thing, right? That I just happened to go on YouTube, and I saw a thing where it was a streamer, the guy who just streamed, just playing games and talks on YouTube all day, talked about his sex life And he's like, why would I actually go out and have real sex? That would mean I have to go out of my apartment and I'd have to go down and talk to people and go to the bar and then maybe meet somebody and bring them back. And then I'd have to take my clothes off. And it's like, I could just go to this Discord server and I've already broken my computer persona sex, right? I'm de-virginized there already. Why would I do all of that? So I think, and then if you also think about it, where we're also in a time where all you need is an internet connection, right? A computer. And like you could literally have a ton of connections, know millions of people, start a company, become world famous, become a billionaire. And you could do it without ever having to have an actual interaction. We're in a time where that's possible. So whenever you uncouple anything from anything else, the same thing happened with the Industrial Revolution, where it uncoupled, like machines brought the world right in front of us. So it uncoupled functioning from movement. Boom, you uncouple those things. And then we have this that transformed our relationship to our body. I think something at a basic level like that is happening with relationship. Now, when you do that with this, when you consider what these awkward things called relationships are, they're how we become people. We become people through them. And they're inherently messy. They're inherently uncomfortable. If you think about all the possible things that could happen by you and I just engaging in a conversation, you could say something to me that I misunderstood that could hurt me so bad that I need therapy for 10 years, right? Or you could say something to me that could enlighten me, right? There's this range of possibilities that could happen in any interaction. And so that's inherently scary. So if you make it optional, right, our nervous systems are just going to do the easier thing, right? And I think we see that all over the place. So I don't think that's the whole reason, right? Why dialectic and the dialogos and everything that we're doing here. I don't think it's the whole reason, but I think it's a big reason why it's speaking to us, right?
A lot worse than it is about things that actually.
I think part of internet poisoning is catastrophizing. And that isn't to say that things aren't bad, the things that we see on the internet aren't bad, but obviously there's a distortion that happens. And I notice it whenever there's, fires in the foothills in Northern California, and my mother wants to check and make sure that everything's okay. I said, no, I live in Sacramento. We're way in the middle of this big bowl. And so the fires it's sort of a ring of fire that happens in California. So no fires in Sacramento. But this, we don't know. We've lost touch with, how's she supposed to know? And same thing, something happens out east. Oh, there's a hurricane. How are you okay, Ma? No, everything's fine. No problem with the hurricane. We catastrophize. And then I think she's right. We sort of retreat into the internet. And because the internet, unlike television set, the internet gives us a sense that, well, it becomes a much better cocoon.
Are not as important as the things that actually are a problem that can be and ought to be addressed, and which I think we can all or ought to all agree on if we actually cared about those things. Yeah.
We'll be back.
Now, this whole business about all agreeing on, she had a section before about, well, we've sort of lost you don't have society anymore because it's lost its narrative and it's fragmented. Okay, a regular topic of conversation on her channel are men and women. And one of the things that I really appreciated about her in this conversation was that she would often talk about patience. And they didn't really connect the internet with lack of patience, but that's certainly a part of it. When I was a kid, you'd have to wait until every Tuesday to watch Happy Days. Now you can just go and stream it online right away. so there's been a shortening of time, and expectations have risen. I think the television set sort of raised expectations because suddenly most of the people that we see are abnormally beautiful, and their lives are created by writers, and they are packaged to fit into half-hour or hour or 2-hour time slots. And one of the things that I've thought for years is that mass media sort of groomed us and honed our expectations into this is what the good life is. It's a deeply religious medium, and it's deeply image based, and it's like, these are the images of the good life, these are the images of the good life. And I've hit this in I'll play it. I very seldom play things from my Sunday sermons, but this is something that I've felt for a long time.
A real estate group in Los Angeles that are selling probably the most high-priced real estate you can find even in a state like California. But the cast almost looks like something from a Bond film, complete with sort of these two short, bald guys who run the organization. And these are sort of surgically modified spectacle women competing for men, money, fame, attention, and everything else. It's sort of like the brightness is turned up too high on the television when you watch it. If you think about what strawberry candy is like, you try to take the strawberry flavor from the candy and you add lots and lots of sugar, and then if you try to eat it and you compare that with the taste of a real strawberry, well, they're kind of like the candy. It's just cloying. You watch a few minutes of it and you don't quite know how you should feel. Now, what's really interesting that in a lot of ways they sort of exemplify what I think for many in America is kind of a default American religion. It's sort of an altruistic hedonism. What's most important is your current emotional state, and that it be the best current emotional state possible all the time. To be happy is to have...
And if you can't manage that best current emotional state all the time, well, there's something wrong, and this sort of triggers, well, it must be someone else's fault. So then we'll look for politics, for blame, for grievance. We've got to fix this, and it's up to our elected officials to fix this and to provide this for us.
And for women, they face really, really challenging times, because if you look at social media, Instagram, I mean, that's just the way designed to make women feel miserable about themselves, their bodies, and their lives, isn't it?
Definitely, yes. I think the worst thing that could have ever happened to young girls is Instagram. I think it's terrible. It has caused so many mental health issues, especially in this country, for young girls, especially during the pandemic. So, yes, I think being a woman now and being a young woman is very difficult, especially in relation to a lot of the narrative online with these young male thought leaders who sort of promote this masculinity that really depends on hating young women or seeing them as objects, which then really sort of reduces everything that young women are told about, especially now, about sort of, pursuing a career.
Now, it's helpful to just pause and recognize that in some ways we can complain about our expectations with respect to the government or society, and we can talk about individual responsibility, but everybody sort of has these jags that they go on with respect to, well, let's dump on Instagram now. And you might say, now, wait a minute. Nobody's putting a gun to your head and making you go to Instagram. Well, yeah, and it's a valid point. It's a society. So you don't want to absolutize either end of this. And at the same time, you should, parents should not let their children on this stuff at least as long as possible. And what you learn very quickly from her is that she didn't have any of these things until she came to the UK. And so in South Africa, so in that sense, she's sort of like an old person. She's sort of like a refugee from a past period of time whose young age wasn't formed by these filters.
Career working, and you do that, but then online especially, you're demonized for doing that because you're not having children and you're not being the stereotypical.
And this is interesting because this comes up a number of times. You know, a lot of sensitivity about, oh, you're demonized, she's demonized. And I've certainly mentioned the benefits and blessings of having children. Now, I want to be fair, and I did a little bit of this on Twitter. When it comes to the question of happiness, if happiness is your goal, you're in trouble. Children won't make you happy necessarily, and definitely not right away. It's been common knowledge via psychology that the most difficult years of marriage are the years where children are in the house. Even though, and I completely understand this now, after, as an empty nester, an almost empty nester, because my son graduated college and has come back, and he's absolute delight to be with in the home. But as an empty nester, you look back fondly and nostalgically to the time when the kids were little. And now that we have pictures and things like that, you see the pictures of the kids and they're so cute. And you start to forget just how hard those years were. Hard on the marriage, hard on the individuals, hard on trying to make enough money to give those kids what they need, yada, yada, yada. And in some ways, throwing gadgets and screen time at the kids is a super easy thing. But now she feels guilt tripped about not having kids. Now she calls herself sort of this female incel, and that's telling. Not that, again, she looks like a very attractive young woman. It surprises me that there've been a number of comments. I've some back and forth in the comments with respect to this. So now maybe she can't find, my head is jumping ahead of my mouth. Maybe she can't find men to date her, probably because of the fact that she is on the internet a lot. That becomes an impediment to finding men because certain aspects of her person are going to be accentuated by the distortion of the internet filter. I'll say it that way. So anyway, she has difficulty. So there's a lot of frustration. She describes herself as an incel, and so probably when she reads people recommending marriage and childhood, that compounds with her frustration in terms of achieving that. And it is an achievement, her frustration with achieving that, and that probably increases her sensitivity towards those messages.
Housewife of the 50s. So yes, I think even though there's more options of how to be a woman for women, it's very hard to not care about what everybody else thinks you should be. And women really take that a lot more to heart than I would say men do, especially young women. I think it definitely, I've noticed, because I have friends who are a lot older, female friends, it definitely over time, it changes, but it is very much a process of becoming a woman. And I think right now, with our age, where everyone is so impatient, we're very, very lazy, everything is on demand, I think women and men both expect of each other to have it all sorted out, all figured out. He has to be making 200K a year already. She has to look like a bombshell and have plastic surgery already and somehow pop out like 5 babies for me and still look hot. And
I think she's exactly right. There's an impatience. And again, I think part of that is that grooming done by the screens of the expectations. And just watch Selling Sunset. Again, you watch that show, and on one hand, it's exactly what they're talking about. And on the other hand, all it is reputation savaging. In fact, that's what the show is barely about property anymore. It's just a soap opera about these women savaging each other and their inability to find happiness when the American dream says, no, that wealth and that beauty and that opportunity and that status should be should be a fire hose of happiness in your life. And, obviously it doesn't work. It might mean you should take a step back and say, maybe this doesn't work.
That obviously when you have just fantasies of people, reality is going to seem absolutely terrible. And so I think that's really, there's a disenchantment.
And when you think about a world before the mind control, and yes, there are no savings throw for mind control here. If you need savings throw for mind control, you have to go to Grim Grizz's channel and he will give you savings throws for mind control. But if you think about a world without screens, now, even before screens, novels, newspapers, you might have stories around the campfire, but your expectations are primarily set by watching the world around you, which is made up of people and nature. And so you already have an expectation of, wow, nature is really dangerous. People are dangerous too, but sometimes they're good. Life is hard. Life is short. People die young. What you don't have is an imagination that life looks something like this. Now, for those of you listening to the audio-only podcast, this is this promotional picture from Selling Sunset with the two mini-me's sitting on bookends, and these the Stepford wives never looked this good. These are, and they have a little bit more diversity in their cast. They have an African woman who is part of the cast too, and again, stunningly beautiful. They're all stunningly beautiful women, but you see them and it's like, this is strawberry candy. This isn't a real strawberry.
Of young people, and a disenchantment and a disappointment with each other and what's on offer, of the opposite sex especially.
Is this the reason why so many women now are having plastic surgery and they're having Botox in their early 20s and lip fillers and all the rest of it?
Yes, I definitely say that's the reason. I definitely think that it's trendy. I think trends now have sort of become mini religions of their own. I think it's something to follow for a time, and then
bam. She said that and it was like bang, lights went off. No, you are dead right. You are absolutely right. These are little mini religions that people give their lives to. And then you can very quickly see the relationship between religion and attention. And they sacrifice their children to it. They sacrifice their future to it. They sacrifice their money to it. No, she said that and it was dead on right.
many. Yes, I definitely say that's the reason. I definitely think that it's trendy. I think trends now have sort of become mini religions of their own. I think it's something to follow for a time, and then the next thing comes. So it's getting a BBL or a lip filler, nose job. They sort of come in waves, and I think it's nice to feel a part of something. And so a lot of women do these things, but also obviously to try and look better.
So also the participation. It's a communal thing when we do this together. And then also, as she's about to say, impact status.
And the next person on social media, to improve upon yourself, to sort of work on yourself. We sort of, I think, have become very desensitized from our human condition physically and anatomically, and we sort of just see ourselves as sort of things to enhance.
And again, if you would imagine life in a village without any screens or images of this nature, now you might have an image, a statue, and a temple that you might travel to from your village, or maybe you live in a city. But this would improve yourself. And we're going to talk about that in a minute now.
And that's somehow going to make us feel better emotionally and psychologically.
And again, she's nailed it right here. This is sort of altruistic hedonism. It's arena on in. If, in fact, And it's also pro-felicity. If my Instagram pictures look this way, if I can participate in the arena in this way, if all of these things are happening, then that will sort of seep into my soul. This is the transition from, again, sincerity, which he talks about, fulfilling your role, your inherited role in the village, to authenticity, sort of expressive individuals, expressing the secret sacred self, and now pro-felicity, becoming a god in the arena of screens.
Which most of the time it doesn't.
It's so interesting that you say that, you know, that we're looking for happiness, all of us, but what you're really saying is we're just looking for it in the complete wrong place. And that's really sad.
And wrong ways, not just... Now notice how we tend to go to place, and that's a tell of this idea that if I can only be in a beautiful home, then I'll be happy. If I can only be in a better neighborhood, then I'll be happy. If I can only be in a better country, then I'll be happy. She goes from South Africa to the UK, and I'm not going to judge between these two countries, but people would say, well, she's going to Cambridge and Oxford, and now she's famous, and et cetera, et cetera. Human hearts don't work this way. Sure, we love being in beautiful places, but the ugliness of the heart can still overwhelm the beauty of the place. And this is what I see often in conversations where people would talk about, well, this is a marginalized community. And I would say, do you know what the suicide rates are in these communities that have arrived, as it were, that where the houses are $1 million listings? We can put this picture up again. This is arriving, correct? This is arriving. And when you watch the show itself, they're miserable. They're desperate. And the narrative of the show is their desperate quest for happiness. And you would think, of all of the people, these should be the ones that achieve it. And they don't, and they can't. Now, if they would say that, no, I'm happy, I'm living my best, I'm blah, 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 blah. No, it's I see happy people. It doesn't look like this.
Bad, because it just means that people are miserable.
Yes, but the alternative is being brave and accepting your fate as a human being.
Oh, now we have sort of Bertrand Russell. We have existentialism. We have the ought of atheism. So, yeah, people are unhappy and it's hard out there, but you must be brave. Okay, brave to do what? Basically to fill my sorrows with pride. But I will argue that leads to this too. Because when you listen to them bicker, I'm above this. I mean, they're all just, marching pride into the gap of their happiness gap. And it doesn't work.
And accepting how tragic the human condition is. And that's very scary when I would say there isn't the hope for salvation on the other side.
So that's what you got left after you've left the religion behind. Well, I guess she's gotten quite British. Well, this is our horrible lot we must deal with, so keep a stiff upper lip and just stoically carry through with life, and I'm sorry, don't expect to be happy. Bah! Oh, that's the best you got. You almost can't blame these people for what they're doing.
It's sort of, you've only got this life now and you want to make the best of it. And so it's like live fast, die young. Like, who cares? It's...
Do you hear nihilism knocking at the door? I do.
Very much, I'm going to be the best version of myself.
Pride.
But that's a good thing. Being the best version of yourself is a good.
And this is where it's tricky. Isn't being a best version of yourself a good thing? It is. We certainly want to strive and reach for an ideal.
Good thing. It depends on what you mean by best. If having
Depends on what you mean by best. And this is where it gets really tricky.
bigger boobs makes you the best version of yourself.
Okay, so let's take our gaze off the surgically enhanced women who have all certainly believed that bigger boobs become the best version of yourself. But of course there would be a status hierarchy, and there's maybe one or two of them that have them naturally, and so they feel superior to the women who had theirs enhanced surgically. But let's look at our host here, and well, wouldn't a better version of himself be someone who, I don't know. Look at how these men fill out their black t-shirts, and look at how much time they've spent in the weight room. And no, certainly, Constantine, wouldn't this be couldn't you fill out that t-shirt a little better? And now let's give the better version of ourselves and the superficiality its due. I mean, let's go to these little men. I'm sure these little men fill out their t-shirt nicely. And is that better? And we'd have to say, yeah, that's better. If I groomed myself better, if I'd use skincare products, and if I would use that razor with more skill, and maybe I can get some hair implants and fill this up. But then again, I can just flip it around and take pride. And I didn't get my hair surgically restored. I'm bald and beautiful. The Broken Clock Tower Discord is going to have a heyday with this video. So, point taken. Yes, a better looking PVK, a little bit more dieting, some better skincare products, I'd have to get a gym membership to begin with, which one of these years is just going to have to happen anyway, because anyway. So wouldn't that be a better PVK? Well, yeah, but again, there's a hierarchy between all of these hierarchies. And exactly what he said before. It depends what you mean by better, and what hierarchies actually should have priority over other hierarchies.
Then you've got a problem. The idea, I'm not a believer either. Struggle with, but anyway,
that was a very interesting interchange.
I'm not a believer either. Struggle with, but anyway, this idea that
You just got to wonder what the are we sort of like Dominic Sandbrook dealing with Tom Holland. Are we going to have to hear this word sacral again, Constantine? I know you're wrestling with this religion stuff, but really here in the UK we don't talk about these things, not in public.
That life is finite can be a hugely empowering thing, because it laser focus.
Oh, more pride, more stoicism. Well, you've only got a short time, so this gives a laser focus, but the laser focus to what end? You get that? Again, this is just filling in the gap with pride.
This is your mind on, like, I've only got one life. I'm only living this one. I'm never going to be here again, so I might as well be honest, be brave, say what I mean, ask the question that no one wants to, whatever it is.
Or you might as well be a jerk, screw your neighbor, be a hedonist, eat all the, get all the hookers and blow you can get your grimy little hands on, and go out in a blaze of glory. A blaze of that kind of glory.
That's right, in this context. It can be very empowering, but if what the best means is that you're liked, or more to the case, your photo is liked, then let's fuck around.
Profilicity.
With the photo, make it look perfect. That's the...
And in fact, the video that I played of hers with the look maxing. That was a fascinating video. Well, if you can't look max in person, at least, it's one thing for me to get hair surgery to put hair back on the top of my head instead of this like little wispy stuff that's left. It's another thing to, have the image wizards on the Broken Tower Discord give me a full head of hair. Maybe what we should do is go to AI and just give me, that great Moses mane and with the beard, and then I can sort of fulfill this other archetype.
The best version of me. So I think part of the problem you're talking about is our definition of what the best version of you is has changed.
That is the conversation.
Changed. And the weird thing is what I find strange is that maybe it's because my generation, millennials, we'll say broadly, although I'm an older millennial, it's like we were told, have a family, do this, get married, buy a house, buy all of this. And we chafed against that.
Now, this is really interesting because I am kind of on the cusp between the boomers and Xers. I'm in there. I'm a very, very young boomer or a very old Xer, depending on exactly where you draw the line. And a whole group of us are right in there. Peterson's in there. Weinstein's are in there. We're all sort of, Sam Harris is in there. We're all sort of right there in, born between 1960 and 1965. And what's interesting was that in my day, nobody had to drill it into your head. It was just assumed. It was just the plan. It was just what you did. And so when you get to the millennials now, the parents are sort of beating at it, which again is almost always a tell for insecurity, that we're losing our grip on this, and what should we do? Now, this whole part of the conversation is super interesting because it gets into the question that I was talking about a few videos ago in terms of influence and the wisdom and the winsome wars. What's the best way to, in fact, influence people? And one of the things that you get from all of these individuals here is don't preach at me.
Right. And so your generation, no one even tries to tell you anything, I think. No one tries to be like, do this, do that.
They all gave up. We all gave up. We said, you're not listening anyway. I'm going to save my breath. You can learn the easy way or you can learn the hard way. And you've already showed me you're not into the easy way. So I'm going to wrap myself in bubble wrap and watch the carnage.
Even though actually, I wish my generation had been not told in forceful terms, do this with the, with the jabbing finger, but more like, life is about certain things. It's about having meaning and purpose in your life. Now, now what's
amazing here is that if you say go to, through the miracle of YouTube, I can pull it up.
I'm striving to understand. Okay, so I want to ask you a bunch of questions about that. So we talked a little bit before about the church bleeding its people. They're leaving. The young people are leaving. And my sense of that is it's because the church does not demand enough of its of young people.
Yeah, I think
doesn't
that's right.
demand.
Steep slope. Now, remember what you just heard from the other guys. Oh, no, they're banging us and they were pointing their fingers into us. And now,
enough. And by not demanding enough, it doesn't indicate its faith in their possibility. And so now in Orthodox Christianity, as I understand it, there seems to me to be more emphasis on the idea that it's each human's obligation to become like Christ. That's the goal. Well, that's that by definition, we could say, and we could speak psychologically about.
And of course, to a degree, this hero motivation, be a Messiah, have a Messiah complex.
About this as well. That means to become the ideal that's beyond rationality. Even that's what you're aiming at. That's what's hypothetically within your grasp. And it seems to me as well that that's what the Mass symbolizes, is that, and I'd be happy to have any objections to this, I would be happy to hear. the incorporation of the host is the embodiment. It's the incarnation of Christ within. That's what it's acting out. That's the idea. I mean, in some sense, it's the consumption of the saving element, but the saving element is actually a mode of being. And this isn't hit home. It's like, look what the church demands everything of you.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything. And the reason that people are
these two are just pushing back on getting married and having babies.
Leaving is because that adventure isn't being put before them.
Yes.
It's like, look, you can have your cars and your money and all of that, but that's nothing compared to the adventure that you could be going on.
Yes, I wish you'd preach to our people, because I think you're absolutely right about that.
He is.
The language we'd use is be a saint. That's the ordinary goal of every baptized person, is to be a saint. A saint means someone who's holy or utterly conformed to Christ. Now press that. To be conformed to Christ means you're willing to go into the dysfunction of the world, to bear its pain, and to bear to it the ever greater divine mercy and love. Now fill in the blank, Francis of Assisi. Mother Teresa, maybe in our time, like when we were younger, if someone said, well, who's a living saint? We all would have said Mother Teresa. Well, what did she do?
The funny thing about Mother Teresa, of course, is that one of the very few books I have a blurb on, James Scott's biography of Mother Teresa. What I liked about James Scott's book about Mother Teresa is he pointed out that I think everybody... Now, first of all, I agree completely with Jordan and the bishop here. The difficulty of the church is, of course, how to do this, where on the one hand, present the challenge in such a winsome way, and then on the other hand, I'm a Calvinist, and it's like, sometimes it's sort of pearls before swine. So, but the Mother Teresa, people today would say, this altruistic hedonism, I want to be a saint. I want to go out and I want to be filled with meaning as I do this cruciform thing to save the world, and I will be propelled by my sense of mission and honor and duty and the slow applause that everyone is giving me. And just read that biography of Mother Teresa. She thought God had abandoned her. She thought God had cared nothing for her and had utterly turned his back on her, and yet she soldiers on. It's like, yeah, that's strength. Because there's none of the slow clapping, and there's none of the, every now and then on Selling Sunset, they do this little altruistic thing where they give back to the community. And, don't do your deeds before men, that you will be applauded.
She went into the worst slum in the world. I've been there. And she bore the suffering of the world, literally picking up.
And she did it even though she thought Jesus hated her.
The dying and bearing their disease and bearing their psychological suffering. And she took on herself the wounds of Jesus. But then think of the smile of Mother Teresa. She brought to that place the ever greater, more superabundant mercy of Christ. That's being a saint. And you're dead right. I think we're not sufficiently calling our people to that kind of heroic.
I can tell you one thing I've experienced. This is really something to see. I spoke in about 150 cities sequentially with a day or two in between, and to large audiences, 3,000 to 10,000 all the time, something like that. And I always paid attention to the audience singly, because I was always talking to one person at a time, but also en masse, to hear. Because if the words are landing in the right place and hypothetically emanating from the proper source, then there's silence. And sometimes that silence can be dramatic, and that's why people say, well, you could have heard a pin drop. It's no one's moving, because their attention is 100% gripped by whatever just happened. And one thing that reliably elicited that was the proposition that the meaning that sustains you and protects you from corruption during suffering is to be found in responsibility. And people that, and I thought part of the reason that produced silence was because no one says that now. they say happiness, or they say rights, or they say privileges, or they say reward, or something like that. They don't say pick up the heaviest load you can carry and or care for that matter, and stumble forward. And I've seen people cut those ideas and put them on T-shirts and play with them. And so it's not that the church is asking too little of its people.
No, it is.
What do you think is going to give you that? Well,
now let's go back to this speech.
So your generation, no one even tries to tell you anything, I think. No one tries to be like, do this, do that. Even
I think there's a little bit of generational opponent processing going on here.
Though actually, I wish my generation had been not told in forceful terms, do this with the, with the jabbing finger, but more like, life is about certain things. It's about having meaning and purpose in your life. Now, what do you think is going to give you that? Well, part of that is going to be a fulfilling career.
Well, again, a lot of this conversation about the woke stuff, people go to the woke stuff because it gives them meaning and purpose. They don't actually have to change anything in their life. They just have to change their profile on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, or they just have to change their profile. And then that gives them a sense of moving the eschaton forward, being on the right side of history, yada, yada, yada. And
but part of that is going to be the people around you. And it may not be a wife and child, although it probably will be, but it may not be that. But it's going to be the meaningful connections you have with other people around you. And
I had an unrecorded Randos conversation today when we talked about the fact that, and I've made this comment many times, no one will teach you how selfish you are better first than a spouse, and then a child, and then multiple children. Because they just show you that I want my me time. And if in fact you do choose yourself over your child, there will be a price to pay.
We were talking before we started, we were joking around about what a post-woke world looks like. That's what I think it looks like. It's a world in which you don't have crusty conservatives telling young people, well, this is how you must live your life. But it is a world in which young people do have access to the wisdom of generations.
Yes, definitely.
And the wisdom of generations.
The problem is, I don't find subsequent generations have any less desire to be preachy. Preachiness is all over the place. And I often think when I watch the internet, everybody wants my job because they all kind of like to stand up on a soapbox and be preachy to us about whatever it is they think is the remedy of the world.
Is basically what I've just said, which is your life is about meaning and purpose, and it's about the people around you that you love and love you.
All right. Life is about the experience of meaning and purpose, is I think what he thinks. Because again, go back to Mother Teresa, she wasn't experiencing meaning and purpose. She was experiencing duty.
That's it, right? It's pretty simple. And every generation eventually comes there, just a question of how long it takes you to get there. And that's what
And that's part of the reason that older people talk to younger people, because ideally, if you can hear about it and then listen to advice and practice wisdom, you can actually achieve some things with less pain, or you can go the pain route.
I wonder, and I'm curious to hear your take, is how do we get to that point? How do we get to the point where younger people have access to that wisdom without feeling like it's being rammed down their throat by old people that they can't relate to?
It's a very interesting question. I would say from my experience, the worst thing that I experience is when, I would say, for instance, older feminists online tell me that my life is empty and that I'm unhappy because I don't have children.
Now, of course, happiness is this red herring as seen by this woman who Matt Walsh sort of lifted from internet obscurity into momentary stardom, where she, rather ironically, as I think Bethel McGrew pointed out on her blog, got into some of these issues.
Well, I'm not married. And it's interesting because these are feminists who are sort of a new cohort of feminists who are anti-progressive feminists.
People like Louise Perry and Mary Harrington, who we've had on the show.
Yes.
Who we love, by the way.
Oh, yes,
and we
likewise.
love you too, but we love them. We love everybody.
Yeah. Likewise.
But I don't think Louise or Mary would ever say you're not happy because you're not married.
Yes. I wouldn't say that.
Come on, we all have watched quite a bit of Mary and Louise, and no, and this is part of my point that I made about sort of the libertarian culture. So again, go back to Bishop Barron and Jordan Peterson, where, you know, the church has to really impress this on young people, but the basic libertarian culture says, no, let them screw up. They're not listening anyway.
In their work. But when it comes to Twitter, for instance, which I think is the place where most young people engage with this discourse.
Ideas,
yes. And
most young people, Twitter has, last I heard, 300 million users? Not most young people.
I think on Twitter, people do say things that make you just want to grate your eyeballs.
Yes.
Internet poisoning.
You remember it's Twitter, though, right?
I do, yes. But I think a lot of young people don't realize that it's just Twitter.
Yeah.
Twitter is sort of...
Internet poisoning.
Somebody described it as the marketplace of ideas now, and that was quite...
Yeah, Elon would like to think it's that.
quite horrifying. Yeah. But I think a lot of young people do actually see it as a place where real things happen. And politicians obviously see the potential of Twitter somehow. But I think...
To colonize us for votes with the mind control.
I think a lot of how we engage, I think there just is such a lack of understanding, I would say, with older generations of how different the world is growing up and being young today.
Let's change that. What are the differences that they don't get about your generation?
That we're doing things just exactly how they do. We are being as stupid as they were, except we have...
Are you really?
...phones and smartphones, and so we put it out to the...
Now, we did plenty of stupid things, true. But again, where's the we? Suicide rates, it's... again, you can't do this math. We tend to think we can, but I really have no confidence that we can sort of, just as these identity buckets have very limited utility, so also the generational buckets.
World. So it's not just our closest friends who see how stupid we are. It's everybody in the world, and everybody then judges you. You go viral and your life is ruined, or you go viral and like...
The majority of people don't go viral, and fortunately, even those who do are often quickly forgotten.
You know, you open an OnlyFans. So it's...
There's the Instagram OnlyFans pipeline. And now I didn't play the part where she's working in retail and with mostly, you know, white Brits, and begins to learn that, oh, yeah, these people that are working day to day here in this job are not dripping with privilege, at least. But then again, how many people from Africa wouldn't happily switch places with them? I mean, these things are impossible to sort of always think through.
It's a very different...
And yet, she didn't turn to prostitution to make ends meet. She went to YouTube and, you know, has a decent-sized channel and is probably making a pretty good living, and good for her.
Different way of growing up and sort of being exposed to not just a small group of people, but to a whole world of people. I think when it comes to, for instance, relationships as well, I think older generations tend to see dating apps as, well, there's so many more people now that you have just, the pick of the bunch. So why is it so hard for you to find somebody? Why is it so hard for you to, find the perfect person? And I think there is often just, it feels quite condescending a lot of the time, sort of when older generations engage with younger generations.
This stuff is so sensitive and it's so difficult where, again, many moms threw up their hands, but not too long. When, if I say it, they don't listen to me. If Jordan Peterson says it, they can't get enough of it. It's like, okay, just be happy the message got through.
Generations, and as a result, younger generations are not interested in older generations. And I do think that our intergenerational divide is a very negative thing, I think.
Which is an amazing thing, again, given her story where, so her mother abandons her and her brother. They're separated. She's raised by this Pentecostal family. The woman who adopts her is not psychologically well enough to raise her, so she goes to her grandmother, who struggles with cancer for 4 years, and then she dies, and then she's sent to the UK to live with her racist, the ex of her grandmother, who longs for the days of Rhodesia. I'm sure they didn't whistle Dixie, but that seems to kind of be the point of it.
It's interesting comparing.
And yet, and I'm not doubting her, she's right. She's longing for intergenerational wisdom. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years in ministry is that I've heard a lot of people say this. Young people, young mothers, I just want a place where there's intergenerational worship and we can all be together. And some churches do in fact achieve it, but most of the young people sort of go where there are all other people that are sort of, this is the church growth observation, that birds of a feather flock together, and these demographic groups will sort of huddle in with doing some looking around and thinking, well, this is doing some relevance realization, and this is the group that I want to be a part of.
Extended families or cultures where there's very strong extended familial bonds, like in the Jewish community or in the South Asian community in the UK.
And what's amazing about this, again, remember just a few minutes ago, they were complaining about the older generation ramming it down their throats. When you get to those kinds of communities, ask anyone in the Asian community, ask anyone in a deeply observant Jewish community. Go ahead and find Jacob Federecci, have a conversation with him and ask him, well, let's get into the Hasidic lifestyle. And no, you'll no longer be a libertarian. They are going to employ all the social pressure they have available to them, which is extensive, to get you do exactly what they think you should do, which will more than likely be find a man. Here's one. Procreate with him now. So it's so funny that on one hand, I just long for these communities where they're doing this. On the other hand, I just can't stand all this nagging about getting married, and even Mary Harrington and Louise Perry. Well, let me tell you, Mary Harrington and Louise Perry on Twitter or Instagram or YouTube are nothing like living in the midst of a deeply observant religious community who is leaning on you. And, we can go right back to our Ayala conversation where, she just wants to get the heck out of there. So all goes down to human nature that we long for the good. We don't like to be told what to do. So often, even when the good is presented to us, we say, no, not that. I want pretty shiny things like this.
Okay, especially sort of looking at how that unfolds relative to the rest of the British population.
Yeah, because they make them do it. One of the, I still haven't pulled the trigger on this project, but look at, there's this Hulu show, Ramy, Ramy, which is the the tale of a young Islamic boy growing up in North Jersey. And all of these tensions that she's voicing here are in that show. And they're nicely portrayed because on one hand, he wants to be a good Muslim. He wants to be down with the program. And in like season 3, he's going to marry the daughter of the imam of this deeply observant mosque in North Jersey. And these are this is the Doug Wilson of Islamic mosques in northern New Jersey. And when he's engaged, he's doing all the things so he can marry the imam's daughter. And then he takes a trip to Egypt and he sleeps with his cousin. Which, of course, once, and they get married, and then it's like the wedding night, and she's basically talking, and I just got to tell you what I did. I slept with my cousin. I believe it was his cousin. And, of course, that's it for the marriage. And he's got to pay this enormous sum to her. And what he doesn't know is that, spoiler alert, after they consummated their marriage that night, she became pregnant and she has a child, and she's not letting his child anywhere near him because he is an agent of chaos. It's a good show. It's a good show. All the tensions are there.
So I do think we're speaking different languages, and because everybody now, not just young people, with young people, but I think everybody now thinks that they're an expert. And because of that, there's
another thing. I've watched YouTube. I'm an expert.
There's no relinquishing. There's no stepping back, listening to, sympathizing with, or
submitting to,
trying to empathize.
I think part of the reason that some of these steep slope religious communities have become so attracted. This isn't Christianity, Orthodoxy in this little corner, conservative Islamism, conservative Judaism, fundamentalisms all over are attractive because people sense these pressures. How many stick with them? Again, the Rami show, it's very telling.
With especially young people. I'll hear so many conservatives like Candace Owens saying, when I was 24, I was doing such stupid things. But then.
And what's amazing is that where do conservatives like Candace Owens come from? They come from exactly this dynamic. Only they usually have a temperament. They're low in agreeableness and they're high in extroversion. And so they're primed for stardom on YouTube.
Then she'll say that young men shouldn't marry a 24-year-old woman because she spent her day making shakshuka and not going out and getting married and popping out a baby. So I think there's just contradiction.
I always feel so old and out of touch. I have no idea what shakshuka is. And I don't really care enough about the question to look it up. I just hear, because that's, of course, what was that meme of that woman. She's going to make shakshuka instead of, because she can do this because she doesn't have a child and she doesn't have a husband. And although I'm sure if shakshuka is so delicious, I'm sure her husband would love to eat it with her. But she can't find a husband because she's been too busy chasing a career, because she had to chase a career because divorce rates are high enough and you might marry a man and he might divorce you and leave you penniless. So instead you live with him and have absolutely no claims on his money at all. And it's like, that makes no sense.
Addictions that now, with young people being so better educated than ever before, but also being very, very stupid at the same time, but thinking they know
And here's all the preachiness.
Everything. And then having older generations who are actually just as messed up, have a lot of problems. I mean, boomers' divorce rates are sort of quite telling of, I think, a lot of issues there as well.
Their divorce rates are higher because, again, in that boomer generation, nobody browbeat them to get married. They actually had social leverage and pressure of the shadow matriarchy and the older generations that made them get married, et cetera, et cetera. And so then the next generation says, we're not going to make that mistake. And then subsequent generation says, we're not even going to make that mistake by not getting married. And that's where we are today.
Yeah, I think we just don't speak the same language. And I think nobody is extending the olive branch to the other.
Well,
there's lots of extending olive branches.
Extended it to you, two boomers, invited you on the show. Here we are.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
No, that's not what I meant. What I'm saying is I'm keen to foster dialogue, actually. I think it's very important. I think it's important that people from different groups and backgrounds and whatever talk to each other and understand where everybody's coming from. And I think, Francis, I have a lot less empathy just by nature. I'm not a very empathetic person, but I think it's not easy. I can't imagine not growing up. Basically growing up in a world in which the internet exists is not something I experienced. And compared to what people are experiencing now, I think that was bliss. Yeah, I really do.
Definitely. And I'm also, for my generation, an exception, because in South Africa, I didn't have internet or phone. So when I came here,
you know how everybody makes this point about the digital divide? We've got to get the internet to all of those disadvantaged, marginalized people that don't have it. Maybe it's the other way around.
Suddenly, this whole world opened up to me.
No, there's a reason the immigrants coming from nations that don't have the internet. First of all, they're coming from nations that don't have the internet. They're coming because they don't have the internet and they're not sitting there wasting all their lives looking at YouTube. And so they actually have the get up and go to come, and they have the get up and go to actually displace other people in their jobs and take the jobs because, well, they're better workers because they didn't have the internet. What a world of strange contradictions.
And so I don't have sort of a whole catalogue of my stupidity on the internet. And so I couldn't imagine.
Well, I'm certainly working on my catalog of stupidity that I would call my YouTube channel.
What it would have been like to have been exposed to Instagram, to YouTube, to all of those things, to TikTok now. And also, you sort of have to go along with it, especially as a young person, in order to be a part of something, in order not to miss out on everything that's going on. I think a lot of young people's sort of actions are driven by fear, ultimately. Fear of not knowing what's going on, fear of being left behind, of not fitting in, but also of being too normal, that you sort of fade into oblivion, especially online. So, yeah.
It's been a wonderful conversation. Z, thank you so much for coming on the show. Before we move on to our section with locals.
They always have the last question, and it's a good question.
And the questions that they're going to ask, which only they get to see. We'll finish with our final question, which is, what's the one thing we're not talking about as a society that we really should be?
Oof. I think we're not talking enough about the need for, I would say, an intellectual movement that isn't based on identity, something that really is all-encompassing of all people. I think we focus...
You mean we don't have a religion?
Way too much on the wrongdoings of people's sort of actions, and I think we've really fallen out of touch with, I think, one of the most important things, in my opinion, which is philosophy, and the importance of philosophy and learning and understanding yourself.
If we only had thousands of hours of thinky-talky stuff on YouTube, then Constantine's going to wade in here.
Through the ideas of other people throughout the ages. I think young people really need to be reading more philosophy. And so I think that is one thing we're not really talking about, I think, definitely.
You're going to struggle with that.
Yeah.
You're going to struggle with that.
I know.
Most people aren't going to read philosophy, which is where we come back to the idea of religion.
It's in Constantine. Francis, that's the other guy. Francis is probably thinking, yeah, we just keep making these shows and this religion thing just doesn't go away.
Some people just want, the commandments. They don't want the book,
Some of them just want the commandments. Some of them want the beauty. Some of them want the ritual. Some of them want more preaching as long as they get to do the preaching.
I've been thinking about that a lot myself. Yeah. Philosophy is great. It really is. It's fascinating. It's interesting. But I don't know that all of this gets sorted by people reading more philosophy.
I think it's a start. I think this all takes a lot of time. And I think patience is the most important thing that we really do lack now.
And again, I like the theme. I like that she kept emphasizing patience here because she's right.
In all spheres. I think we want quick fix solutions to a lot of things. And I think we need to go back and we need to understand why we are where we are. And that's going to take a long time and a lot of patience and a lot of forgiveness of other people. And yes, it's going to be challenging, but it will be worth it at the end.
She's got that Protestant eschatology in her dream.
I have hope, but we'll see.
We will see. Before we head over, your YouTube channel's Kidology. People should check it out. And of course...
And that's pretty much the end. And then they go to Locals. I'm a little vague on what even Locals is. I think it's another social media network that's monetized where you can have your exclusive content behind a paywall, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, it's a good conversation. You should listen to the whole thing. And really enjoyed it. So check it out. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think.